Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. And there you have it. It looks like so far Bitcoin is following the yellow path we said was most likely a couple of weeks ago. And as long as we're seeing continued strength for the dollar index, it's likely that we see weakness for Bitcoin and other risk assets in the short term. And of course, weakness for Bitcoin in the short term combined with a very strong breakout in Bitcoin dominance, especially if it can maintain above the 54% level, is a terrible combination for altcoins, which of course are further out on the risk curve. And this is shown by the fact that a 17% correction in Bitcoin so far has resulted in a 40% correction in stronger altcoins like Solana and 50, 60, even 70% corrections in some of the newer, riskier projects that have launched recently. And I know it's been very annoying that my portfolio has been very conservative recently and I've refused to buy altcoins. And it's not really just the fact that they're further out on the risk curve. That reason is very obvious. But something that's been bothering me is, for one, a lot of these newer altcoins, even older ones, have major unlocks happening day after day, week after week, month after month. And when these venture capitalists are up hundreds of X's or even thousands of X's, they have no incentive to hold on to the project as soon as their tokens unlock. They would much rather try to front run the other unlocks, front run the other venture capitalists, lock in their profits, and move that money into something more stable like Ethereum, Bitcoin, or even stablecoins. So altcoins, especially these newer projects where unlocks have started, have to deal with this gravity of constant sell pressure. So even if there is some market participants DCAing or slowly buying into these projects, it just can't keep up with the sell pressure of VCs selling once prices go down. And of course, this is reflexive. When altcoins are going up aggressively, VCs aren't tempted to sell because their investment is continuing to go up in value. But as soon as prices reverse, or as soon as there's a risk-off backdrop because Bitcoin is going down or the S&P 500 is going down because we're seeing a bit of risk-off in traditional markets, these venture capitalists immediately start dumping their positions, and the buy pressure cannot keep up with that sell pressure whatsoever. And Solana is one of those projects that has a relatively low unlock schedule and inflation rate compared to a lot of the newer, hotter projects. But if we just pull up my watch list of some of the recent hotter projects I've been watching, some of these charts are absolutely atrocious. And usually the ones that have the larger unlocks, especially recently, had way more aggressive capitulations and way more aggressive sell-offs because of this dynamic. And as if constant sell pressure from VCs wasn't bad enough, altcoins also have to deal with the fact that they have so much competition. I mean, anybody that knows about this market is very familiar with Bitcoin. They're very familiar with Ethereum. Maybe this cycle they've been looking into and buying Solana. So these assets tend to have a more consistent passive bid and less sell pressure. But when it comes to altcoins, I mean, you have altcoins from the previous cycle that were favorites that some people still hold and buy, but then you have all of the new projects launching every week and competing for capital and mindshare. So the older projects kind of fall to the wayside and just have to deal with their inflation without that consistent buy pressure. Not to mention, a lot of these tokens today are getting airdropped and dumped immediately. And if they're not dumped immediately, they start getting dumped once there's a new hotter narrative to rotate into. And it ends up being this musical chairs phenomenon where new projects get all the capital and attention and rally pretty hard. And when other investors start selling their other more boring altcoins to chase those newer positions, it leads to aggressive sell-offs in some of those less exciting and maybe more established projects. And finally, a lot of these altcoins just don't get the passive flows that Ethereum and Bitcoin do. Maybe even Solana gets that a little bit as well. I'm sure a lot of people dollar cost average Solana every week. And I know there's people that dollar cost average some altcoins every week, but it's nowhere near as consistent as what Ethereum and Bitcoin get from more passive investors that maybe don't follow this space as closely and don't follow the day-to-day price swings and just have an auto DCA set up on Coinbase or some other exchange. And that's why it's so hard for these altcoins to keep up and perform well over larger time frames, it is very hard to maintain users, maintain attention, and maintain capital inflows when you have constant rotations and constant chasing of newer projects and newer opportunities. It's still very likely that we see relief bounces in the short term. Maybe we do end up seeing some V recovery and rally higher in the short term. But the reason why I feel so comfortable with my current portfolio is because I don't have to worry about major VC unlocks or major inflation rates on these assets. So if we see more of a risk-off scenario, I would expect these three assets to hold up a lot better than some newer projects with big unlocks and high inflation rates. And once the Bitcoin halving is behind us, and it's getting very close, just 3 days away now, we've enjoyed so much excitement and so much mainstream media attention thanks to this upcoming halving and thanks to the ETF launches that I do think this market is overdue for a cool-off period. And we can go ahead and remove this line here finally. A little bit bittersweet. It's been on the chart for weeks and weeks and weeks now. But now that the halving is going to be behind us soon, where is that excitement and demand going to come from, especially if we see a bit of a cool-off in traditional markets in the short term? But anyway, no matter what happens, I still think bounces are incredibly likely, so I would definitely not sell everything or sell all my altcoins today to try and buy them back lower, but I would just remind myself that anything is possible in this market. And just because something has had a large correction doesn't mean the bottom has to be in or it has to bounce immediately. So for now, I'm still going to refrain from buying any altcoins or adding to any riskier positions until the dust settles a little bit and until I see at least a 20% correction for Bitcoin, which as of right now gives me a target of about 58K, I believe. Once we hit 58K, maybe I will go shopping a little bit, and I'll definitely cover that in a future video. But for now, and most of the time, if you're not a day trader, there isn't that much to do. I mean, there's no reason to be panicking every day and deciding if you're going to sell everything and buy back, or should you FOMO in right now in case this ends up being the bottom? Because, I mean, there is a non-zero chance this is the bottom. I think it's way more likely we swipe these equal lows down here, and if this is going to be bullish, we end up at least coming to around the 60K region before rallying higher. But of course, that is not guaranteed, and we're going to have to monitor it going forward. But I like to have a strategy and a portfolio that can weather many different scenarios and doesn't rely on an immediate bull market happening tomorrow for me to survive. So anyway, we'll see what happens. For now, I think there's a couple ways this can play out. Either Bitcoin ends up swiping liquidity here in the high 50s, low 60s region and get a bounce and get a rejection on the underside of 65K before going lower, or we end up seeing a more aggressive sell-off earlier and then a bullish reclaim of the 60,000 level would look solid for some continuation to the upside. But one of my major concerns right now in the short term is I think a good argument can be made that Bitcoin is in the process of breaking the parabola we've enjoyed since the bottom in 2022. And of course, you can redraw this a bunch of ways, but normally for parabolas, you want to see consolidations slow down more and more and more. And our previous consolidation, I think, was about 8 or 9 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. So if this consolidation ends up taking longer, it becomes incredibly likely that this trend is over and we're going to see a longer consolidation reaccumulation period as outlined by this yellow drawing here. But of course, we want to see the weekly close before knowing for sure. And if we do see 58 to 60K this week, I will be buying some positions and taking advantage of that 20% dip, but I will still leave cash available in case we go lower. But anyway, we'll see what happens. A lot of my concerns are more short term, and I think we're still fine in the medium to long term. Once this halving narrative is behind us, it should be fun that the halving is happening on 420. The memes in this space never get old. And of course, we're seeing continued slowdown and kind of a die down in the excitement of ETF inflows, which we saw coming eventually. Obviously, they surprised to the upside in the short term, but now they're kind of calming down and slowing down as expected. And with those two main narratives behind us, I do think consolidation and correction makes a lot of sense here. Ethereum has surprisingly been holding up very well. Obviously, it underperforms significantly to the upside, so there's less short-term money to panic sell in my opinion, and it's still holding above its 20-week moving average, and Ethereum will get interesting as we approach that first May ETH ETF deadline. But of course, the main appeal of Ethereum is the monetary policy. I mean, it's essentially a fixed supply asset right now, and the inflation and issuance goes to stakers who are unlikely to sell their Ethereum consistently unless they have a reason to. And for that reason, I think that's why it's holding up well. It doesn't have the same inflation and VC unlock issue that newer, smaller projects do. And of course, we also have my favorite altcoin Solana, which funny enough, even though it is down 40%, it is still up 12x from the absolute bear market low, and it's still up about maybe 6 or 7x since the 13x earlier from the bear market low, and 7x from the lows right before the breakout. And I mean, we knew this was bound to happen. We knew that these FOMO candles tend to retrace eventually. But as of right now, we're going to have to see how this weekly candle ends up closing. And I will buy Solana once Bitcoin sees that 20% correction. And if it doesn't happen and Bitcoin doesn't correct that much, I'll just sit on my existing Solana entries from a lot lower. But I'm definitely not going to sell my Solana, Ethereum, or Bitcoin here to try and buy them back. That's why we have cash on the sidelines to take advantage of those dips. And of course, a lot of this was catalyzed by the breakout in Bitcoin dominance. 54% is the level to watch, in my opinion. If we see it somehow break back below there because something bullish happens, then I think it could be time to buy some altcoins, and maybe alt season is on the horizon. But it looks a lot more likely now that it continues higher in the short term versus lower, based on the strength of this breakout. And thanks to these rate cut expectations getting pushed back more and more, I do think this will change. I do think the market is getting ahead of itself in terms of pricing out rate cuts. I do think we get them sooner than what the market is saying right now, but the market is pricing in these expectations as of right now, which is no cut in May, no cut in June, no cut in July, and first cut in September. I think we get cuts earlier than that, because the interest expense on the federal debt is going to go out of control if they don't start cutting rates soon, even if inflation is somewhat elevated. But we'll see what happens. I know this video was relatively negative, but I'm just kind of talking about the price action, how I see it. But importantly, in the long term, the deficit continues to go up, government spending continues to go up, currency devaluation continues to go up, and that is a trend that isn't going away. I mean, this curve is going in one direction, which is why I think Bitcoin will do well in the medium to long term, but we will have to weather some volatility in the short term after such a bullish move that we've had over the past year and a half or so across the board in this market and in risk assets as a whole. And some healthy cool off would be good to see in the short term. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Let me know what you expect. We'll definitely keep an eye on Bitcoin's price and its relationship to rates. We've been discussing how maybe we could have a local top here because the market is having to come to terms with the rates being higher for longer. And of course, our base case is still this yellow scenario. No idea how deep this correction goes for now, but it is nice to see some reaccumulation around the previous all-time high. And of course, we'll monitor it going forward. Hopefully you guys weren't impacted too badly by what's happened to altcoins recently, and you have some of your money in either cash or more stable assets like Ethereum and Bitcoin. But like I said, I don't think that selling assets to buy them back lower works out majority of the time. And if you have assets you believe in long term, you're better off holding through the volatility and maybe adding to positions when they're heavily discounted with cash on the sidelines. But we'll monitor what happens going forward. Thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.